Now, Max Blumenthal, rather like Joe Lauria, is a world-class investigative reporter, journalist, and analyst, and I'm proud to call him a friend, and he joins us now. Max, thank you at this late hour for us, joining us on the mother of all talk shows. You and the Grey Zone, of which you are a part of the leadership, have broken some really fantastic and important stories since you came into being. But few have given British people like me more joy than the revelations about Paul Mason. But for the non-British audience, perhaps you could survey the importance of that story for us.
Well, I'll speak from a personal point of view, and I'm sure that you share this perspective, George, and thanks for having me on to talk about this. Thanks for devoting so much attention to this while the British mainstream press has ignored it in a very disciplined fashion. This is important to me because I know that for years, I and the Grey Zone have been targeted by an intelligence-linked operation that has relied on forward-facing journalists, activists, and cutouts to attack us so that the intelligence services have no fingerprints on this. Or alternately, this cast of characters has sought to enlist the state in the attack on us. And the attack has been designed to discredit us by painting us as some kind of vehicle for Kremlin influence, something artificial, it's not independent, because they can't grapple with our factual reporting and investigative journalism, which is just producing too many stories that are inconvenient to their and disruptive to their agenda. And so now we finally have the proof. Now we finally have cold, hard evidence in the form of emails between Paul Mason and an intelligence contractor who is deeply involved in the Syrian dirty war named Emil Khan. And as we've just realized, someone who is actually inside the Foreign Office, Andy Price, who seems to be sort of functioning as Mason's handler or his main line into the state. Andy Price is the head of the Counter Disinformation and Media Development Unit in the Foreign Office, and he helped guide the British government's propaganda response to the whole Skripal affair. And Mason is creating target lists of leftists, and he's basically targeting the entire Corbynite left. He believes that they're all a channel for Chinese and Russian state influence, and that they are corrupting key constituencies of labor. And he outlines these constituencies as the Muslim community, the young network left, the Black community, Scottish nationalists, and so on. And he wants to neutralize the left, working hand in glove with the state while posing as a leftist himself, who is one of the UK's top celebrity journalists and known as a former advisor to Corbyn himself, who Mason is plotting against. So that's why I think this is significant. And it really shows you how the media works in the UK and how much democracy has been corrupted.
Well, perfectly summarized. I can vouch for the fact that he was once not just a leftist, but an ultra-leftist, leagues to the left of me, for example. Yeah. I haven't moved an inch in all my life, but he regarded me, when I first knew him, as a backsliding reformist, which was the worst insult you could give someone back in those days. Not a real revolutionary like him. He was a crazed Trotskyist then, with a group called Workers' Power, although it had no workers in it and it had no power. That's what they called themselves. And he's as crazed now, a witch-hunting, blacklisting McCarthyite as he once was a crazed Trotskyite. I'm not sure if we're in psychological territory or political territory here.
Well, these emails paint a picture of someone who's deeply paranoid, who has fallen into a state of vengefulness against anyone who even lightly criticizes him, anyone of any stature who lightly criticizes him on Twitter, and begins to launch campaigns against them and asks the state to investigate them. And that's what happened to us at the Gray Zone. Mason believes that we are at the center
Yes.
of this vast disinformation network, which is secretly controlled by Russia, which is totally false. And he reached out to first Emil Khan, and they began to try to coordinate an anti-Gray Zone summit involving BBC journalists and people from prominent publications in the UK. They were seeking to bring Bellingcat as well into it. Bellingcat being the US and UK state-funded open source investigative journalistic so-called collective, basically a Victims of Gray Zone Memorial Foundation. Anyone who had a vendetta against us, and they composed a mock invite to this summit. And the goal of the summit was going to be to conceive means of convincing the British state to launch some investigation into us. And it was a really harebrained scheme. I don't know what's come of it, but what wound up happening is that we obtained all of these emails showing that Mason is not just some journalist himself. He's someone who at least wants to be an asset of the intelligence services and is communicating closely with Andy Price at the Foreign Office, who has the capacity to deplatform people, to convince social media platforms that he's speaking on behalf of the British government, they should deplatform outlets. So this is a very dangerous scenario. And two things that they proposed, Mason and his intelligence contractor friend Emil Khan, was the relentless deplatforming of the Gray Zone, simply because he doesn't like our opinions, not because we've said anything false. And number two, full nuclear legal, waging a lawfare assault on us to drain us of funds. And we've already experienced a phony SLAPP lawsuit in the United States that we defeated after several years, but this was part of this ongoing strategy targeting us and targeting pretty much anyone who gets in the way of the security services.
Well, look, I mean, all of this is, of course, complementary to you and your colleagues. It is the case that you are the preeminent, though not alone by any means, but the preeminent source of the breaking of stories that challenge and therefore, because they're paper thin, their cases, challenge the narrative of the powerful in your country and in mine. And so they're right to identify you as a target that they should fear. And long may that be so, and more power to your elbow. But let me, because the hour is late here in the show, ask you a question that I may have the wrong end of the stick on. My reading of the emails was more that Mason was chasing the security services rather than that they were chasing them, that he was seeking to inveigle them in his obsessions, his paranoia, rather than they trying to inveigle him. Have I got that wrong, or is that also your reading?
Based on what I know and what I've seen of his communications with the intelligence services in the Foreign Office, I would say that's a correct reading, generally a correct reading, but he's getting a lot of feedback and there is a lot of consultation taking place, a lot of back and forth, which indicates interest in Mason's schemes. And I think we'll have more on this.
I was going to ask if you've got more, and I hope that there is. He's now well and truly outed. He's a burnt asset, really, for the security services if they were thinking of taking him on, because anything he says or does henceforth will be viewed through the prism of what we know about him, thanks to you and the Grey Zone. So he joins some discredited, although not discredited enough, McCarthyites from the past. But here's one who's very much not discredited that I want to ask for your view on a comparison with. George Orwell was a very similar kind of person to Paul Mason. George Orwell had almost exactly the same kind of extreme Trotskyite politics in the beginning as Paul Mason. And George Orwell, Eric Blair, as his real name was, used to have lunch with people and then send reports to the British intelligence services about what his own friends had said at lunch, even in their homes, even in his home. He would invite people, friends of his, and then rat on them to the security services. Mason's nothing like as good a writer as George Orwell,
No.
but he's as good a rat. He's just as good a rat.
Yeah, Mason comes from a long tradition here, and I'm sure you've showed your viewers and listeners the paranoid and McCarthyite mind map that Mason drew up of his targets on the UK left, which goes, starts with the Russian and Chinese state and then ends up with key labor constituencies. George Orwell snitched out Paul Robeson. Paul Mason, in this chart, snitched out the entire British Black community. And that should be totally discrediting to his ambitions as a Labour MP, his ambitions to serve in Parliament. He should be protested everywhere he goes. He should be relentlessly grilled about this. And he's called for us to be deplatformed. He's the one who should be relentlessly deplatformed for his scabbing and snitching and collusion, secret collusion with the intelligence services against grassroots groups, against well-meaning people. He's the threat to democracy, not us. He's a greater threat to democracy than anyone in the Russian FSB. And that's the takeaway here. And he has yet to address any of this except to claim that he's just the victim of some kind of Russian hack and dump operation. No, he's not the victim. Everyone who's been around him in the UK left, especially Jeremy Corbyn, who he claimed to represent and speak for before the British media, are his victims. And they need accountability. And finally, huge credit to Kit Clarenberg for pulling these investigations together. Check out all of Kit's work at thegrayzone.com. I mean, there's stunning stuff on UK politics that you won't get anywhere else that really shows you who's pulling the strings here. And we're going to have more in the coming days and weeks.
Brilliant. Well done, Kit Clarenberg. Well done, Max Blumenthal. Well done, The Grey Zone. You have become a national treasure here in the United Kingdom. Thanks for doing so and telling us about it here on the Mother of All Talk Shows.